Kirk McElhern takes control of Apple Media apps. Part 2. This is Mac Voices. Mac Voices is supported by the MacVoices 2025 Holiday Gift Guide shows. Find gift ideas, both tech and non-tech, that you would like to give or get at macvoices.com/holiday gift guide or by searching for 2025 MacVoices Holiday Gift Guide on Flipboard. Kirk, the one problem I've had with those kind of instant gratification playlists, if you will, with the exception of Pandora, and I know that Pandora has really lost its market share, but Pandora was still the best music discovery, or for lack of a better term, deep track kind of music service. Because if in Spotify or in Apple Music, if I hit that button, I inevitably hear the things that you always hear everywhere. You know, the like you say, the greatest hits or the top stuff. And
not me.
Really? Okay.
I hear, as I said, I hear music that I've listened to, artists that I've listened to, plus some other stuff. Again, this is the personal radio station I'm talking about. This isn't, so they have a whole bunch of different, and I'm calling up Apple Music on my iPhone. They have a bunch of different personal mixes that they call them, and they just yesterday changed the name of the favorites mix to your essentials. So that's basically things you've either favorited or listened to a lot. And then there's another one, which is your personal radio station. So it'll have your name and radio station, then Discovery Station. And then the other mixes are Get Up. This used to be, I guess they just changed this too, Get Up Mix or something they used to call it. Chill, they used to call it Chill Mix. So they moved mix from all of them. New Music, Friends, Heavy Rotation. So these are all stations based on what you listen to. This is not inspired by what other people listen to, except for the Friends one. It's not, there's no payola involved for labels to get in. This is all purely to do with your own library. When Apple introduced Genius, and this goes back to like iTunes 10, the way Genius worked is it would make a snapshot of your library, it would upload it to Apple, and it would say, okay, so Chuck has some Kiss and some Carole King. And if I have Carole King, but I don't have Kiss, maybe I'll like Kiss because Chuck likes it. Not because you're my friend, but they're looking at all the people in the world and all the libraries and what commonalities there are. This was a huge, big, before we used the term AI, this is probably a machine learning thing that they would calculate that if someone has these 5 albums in their library, and this person has the same 5 albums, what does the one have that the other doesn't have? And that's what they would try to find. They rolled this into Apple Music early on, and obviously they've iterated and they've refined it, but it basically is looking at what you have in your library, what you listen to, what you favorited, and potentially what other people who listen to similar music might have. But when I listen to my personal radio station, I don't get a lot of things that I don't know. Which could be a weakness. The Discovery mix is a little bit different, and that's one of these weekly things. That's based on my listening history. And imagine a mind map where my library is in the center. The Discovery mix is like 1 or 2 notches out from that. So it's trying to find things that are similar, so people who like this like that kind of thing. But it's none of the, I don't get Taylor Swift in any of my mixes or radio station ever. Nothing against Taylor Swift. I just don't listen to that music.
Yeah. And if I misrepresented it, I'm sorry, because what I'm talking about, and I'll give some specific examples, that if I do my personal radio station, sooner or later and very quickly I'll hear Back in Black by AC/DC. Or something like that, and it's nothing wrong with the track. I love the track, but I'm usually looking for the less played to death kind of music, and yet it seems like the played to death music still rises to the top, and as a result, I don't use playlists as much as maybe I could or should.
So it's certainly weighted, right? It's weighted by artists you listen to a lot and favorites, and it's going to be more likely to play the hits by those artists than the non-hits. And so just you tap the next button and you move on. The one problem I have with my personal radio stations, I have very eclectic music tastes. Some days I listen to classical music. Some days I listen to punk. Some days I listen to jazz. Some days I listen to the Grateful Dead. And the personal radio station doesn't give me those options. So it'll come up, I'll go out for a walk and I want to listen to some music to move, right? And it just starts playing classical music and I just keep going next, 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 next 20 times until it gets to something else. It's not for eclectic listening, the personal radio station isn't ideal. But then the other option is pick an album and then you tap the little 3-dot button and you choose create radio station or whatever it's called. And that's kind of like a Genius mix where it takes a song or an album and it builds a radio station off your selection. And you can skip the first song to get other things, and you'll get things in your library and things that aren't in your library that are similar, that other people like who like that, etc. Again, the difference here is that Spotify does have promotional considerations to get music into playlists, and they've got AI music too now. Apple Music doesn't do that sort of thing when you create your own playlist. Now, when they have their own curated new pop music playlist, I don't know what Apple does for that. They may get paid for some placements there, but you have a whole bunch of options on your home screen that are purely based on your listening, your favorites, your library, etc.
The one thing we haven't talked about here much, we kind of went off into a music direction, which is fine, but we haven't talked about the Podcasts app. Are you satisfied? Because you produce a podcast. I obviously produce a podcast. Are you satisfied with the Apple experience inside podcasts?
I never use it. I use Overcast, and I've used Overcast since it was released. I find it a much better app. Now, Apple's podcast app has automatically generated transcripts, which I think is a good thing. And every once in a while, I'm looking up something and I'll do a search in a transcript when I'm trying to find someone talking about something. Podcasts are a weird beast because people subscribe to them and they listen to them and they probably pay less attention than they do to music. I mean, there are people who listen to these 3-hour tech podcasts and keep them on in the background while they're working. And they can't be paying attention to anything. They just want voices talking. It's like people who put YouTube on all day, right? They're just seeing what's there. Like you can subscribe to podcasts in Apple's app, and it's an excellent app for doing that. And they're all pretty good, I think. Podcast apps. None of them that have managed to survive are bad. The early days of podcasting, and this goes back to 2005 when Apple started supporting podcasts in iTunes. There were a bunch of bad apps that came out and disappeared pretty quickly. And then, it's kind of stabilized. And this is another area where we're not going to see much innovation. And yes, Apple added transcripts, which is a good thing. But there's not much you can do with podcasts. You subscribe, you either listen in order or you don't.
So I feel like this might be one of going back to your comment about techies and normies, because I'm with you. I use Overcast. Because of a number of the features, including the playlist features, including the multiple speed capabilities of it, and so
the speed, the what is it called? Voice
enhancement?
Smart speed. Smart speed.
Yeah,
the smart speed is brilliant, and yes, other apps have something similar, but Overcast does it so much better. Plus, when you pause a podcast and you go back, it goes back 10 or 15 seconds. So you can rehear the last sentence and know where you are. I just think Overcast, the design is wonderful, and it's an indie app. And Marco Arment, the developer, is a very good guy, and I'm glad to use his app. And it's been 6-8 years the Overcast has been around, maybe more.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I've delved into Apple Podcast app because I want to see obviously how my shows are presented there, and they're fine. The transcripts are great. It is something that is being done by Apple, so I don't know if Marco would have the capabilities of doing that or not. But bottom line, it's a fine podcast app. It's another one of those Apple apps where you feel like it gives you everything you need, but if you want to take that step up to the next level, you've got to go looking to third parties.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's the case for See, it's hard to separate the Apple's Music app from the Apple Music service, Apple's TV app from the store, and the Apple TV X Plus service, etc. Podcasts is very different because it is all third-party content. And yes, there are some paid subscriptions in Apple Podcasts, but very few. So Apple's not really selling anything in the podcast app like they are in music, like they are in TV, like they are in the books app for ebooks and audiobooks. So the podcast app is an outlier, and they won't change anything. They'll keep it, all of these apps, they're not going to change. They'll tweak, they'll get some incremental changes. And yes, transcripts are a nice feature. And Apple can afford to do it because they've got these big servers. So what they probably do is when it first launched, when the feature first launched, they were doing it on new podcasts. And then I think they've just been going back when they have time for podcasts as they're downloaded to generate transcripts. And if you were to go back in your podcast, you'll probably find transcripts going back pretty far. I haven't really searched in mine, but it's a practical feature, and it's something that, yeah, Marco can't do that in Overcast. Maybe some of the other apps can. It's a pretty processor intensive thing, but of course Apple does it on their own servers. And that means that, they've just got this huge library of podcast transcripts for all the episodes they have on their servers.
It's really interesting that and I don't want the point to get lost, that the Apple apps, the Apple Media apps, especially music and TV, really do shine when they're interacting with their service counterparts. As when you're trying to use it outside of, in the case of the Apple TV app, the TV app, that if you're not using Apple TV, the service, it starts to present those challenges that I was talking about. And I admit I hadn't thought about it in exactly that way. So it does favor using and taking full advantage of those services.
Well, Apple's services revenue is the fastest growing segment of their revenue, and it has been for the past however many years, probably since Apple Music was launched, and they started. How old is Apple TV? 6 years old, and that really brought these services, subscription services, to Apple. And fewer people buy movies and rent movies, I think, anymore because there are so many streaming services you can get them from. If you look at the Apple TV store at any given time, the most popular movies, you'll see a couple of new movies, but the most popular ones tend to be the ones that are discounted or the bundles that are discounted. If you look in the top 10 or top 20, more than half of them are discounted movies. So people aren't paying a lot to buy or rent new movies. But this is ka-ching for Apple. Every time you get something from them, it's a little bit more, and the Apple One subscription means that people are, I guess, locked in, right? My use of Netflix is every 3 or 4 months, I subscribe for a month. I add stuff in between to my wish list, and then, I'll subscribe for a month. I'll pay the extra to get 4K, which is ridiculous. You have to pay extra. And I'll watch what I want for a month. And 3 or 4 times a year, I do that. I don't keep streaming services except for Apple TV because I have an Apple One subscription and it's economical with everything that's in it. But I don't keep other streaming services anymore. I used to. Well, Prime Video used to be part of my Amazon Prime subscription, and it's not anymore. I used to have Netflix for years. I would pay for it. And then they raised the price, and then the quality of so much stuff on Netflix has dropped. So I think a lot of people are doing that now. They've realized they don't have to keep subscribing. And Apple's main goal is to get people into Apple One because they do commit. You will keep subscribing to your streaming music service because that's something you're going to use more often. And you're never going to think, oh, do they have any good new albums this month? That's not how you think about music. Whereas you do for movies and TV. That's Titus, by the way.
Oh, hello, Titus. Yeah, it's, there's so many different ways you have to look at this. And that's one reason that I really love the Take Control books, as I've said a million times, because they point out all of these things. They teach you how to get the most out of, in this case, the Apple Media apps, and to maybe, if there are any pain points for you, maybe eliminate them or at least reduce them. So, Kirk, is there
So I
anything-
just want to go back. I
Yeah.
just want to go back to the we're
Please.
old thing again, because I was looking. No, I mean, think about this, Chuck. You and me, we've been in this business for a while, and 25 years ago, next April is when iTunes came out. 25 years ago in October is the iPod. iTunes Music Store, April 2003. Do you remember back then the iPod in 2003, in early 2003? Do you remember it? It was not a big deal. But it was not a big deal. It was only a big deal when iTunes for Windows came out in October 2003. And it was only around 2004 that sales started really taking off, and 2005 was like when it went exponential. So those first years were still, here's this cool gizmo, but is it going to be a success? And it wasn't until Apple, brought out iTunes for Windows, and if those people who aren't old enough to remember the iPod, you would connect it to your computer. It would sync all the music from your library, which was pretty miraculous back then. And since you couldn't do it on Windows, it didn't sell initially. And I'm sorry, my cat is saying hello here. Once they got iTunes for Windows, that's when it went stratospheric. My first iPod was in 2003. I was looking up models. It's the third iPod model, the one which was the first one with the dock connector. You remember the first one had a FireWire connector. And my first book on iTunes and iPod was iPod and iTunes Garage, published in January 2004. The logline was this was a Prentice Hall series, and the logline was, "I do my best work in the garage." And it was a really kind of dumb cover of like a tool bench in the garage. And they had like Java Garage and Web Design Garage and a bunch of things. It didn't last long. But that period, 2004, is when things started taking off. And we're looking now, the iPod's dead. The iPhone does most of what you need. You don't need to put your own music on it. And the change has been, it's been a profound change in these 25 almost years since iTunes came out.
And it's a change that it's been an evolution that it takes someone like us and this conversation to really appreciate the scope of the change. Because at the time, it was, if you wanted to take music with you, your options were portable cassette players, portable, I guess back then, portable CD players. It was kind of a revelation.
Well, there were MP3 players before the iPod.
Yeah, but they were painful.
And you would have to drag and drop your songs into a folder, and they didn't have playlists, and you couldn't listen to albums, and it was really, yeah.
Yeah, it was painful. I mean, because I had a couple of those, and they were more trouble than they were worth. It was just easier to get one of those CD players, or cassette players, and then the iPod came along, and we're also back to the interface discussion, because it was the interface as much as the device that was magic.
Exactly. Yeah, it was the simplicity. Yeah. And there's one thing I'd like to point out. It's the consistency over 25 years. Jeff Robin was one of the developers of SoundJam, which is what Apple bought to make iTunes. And he's still at Apple overseeing the music app and other media apps. And this is 25 years. It's not common in a tech company for someone to be in the same position overseeing a product as important as that.
Well, he got so much of it right so early. And it's kind of comforting.
He did, but usually
he's still there.
People like that often move on to other things. But you do have this lineage of consistency from SoundJam to the music app today that's still going on. And you've got this vision that is maintained. And I mean, he's going to eventually retire, right? He's more or less our age, I think. So he's going to eventually retire. And will that change anything with these apps? I don't know. Again, I can't see Apple. Do you remember, was it iTunes 11 where, iTunes had the problem with media types, and which is why they eventually split the app up, and you had music and you had videos and audiobooks, etc. And there was one, it was either iTunes 10 or 11, where there was a menu above the sidebar. You would choose a media type, then there were tabs above the content section. And this broke my brain. Like, this is like a pivot table in Excel, you know, that kind of thing that you really have to have like studied nuclear physics to understand. And that was a mistake, and they got rid of that. But they developed an interface that works, and I would argue that the iTunes interface is what influenced pretty much all of Apple's apps. Again, sidebar on the left, content to the right of it. Any Apple app that has that layout is influenced by iTunes originally.
That's a good point. That's a real good point. And the breaking apart was controversial. I know that, and I was one for a while that, it's like, well, why? If everything is in one place. But somebody had the foresight to see just where it could potentially go. Now, if they tried to have all the media apps in one place, it would be a disaster.
I don't agree. I don't think it was a problem for iTunes. I think the problem was that you had so many Windows fanboys who said, "Oh, iTunes is bloated." It's like, how come you're not saying Microsoft Word is bloated when you only use 3% of its features? It's the same kind of thing. If you weren't using videos in iTunes, you didn't see anything about videos. It was well enough designed, except for that period with the pop-up menu of the sidebar. It was well enough designed that you could ignore the features you weren't using. Um, Obviously, on mobile devices, they did have to separate them. And I guess long term, it does make more sense because they can be more consistent now. As I mentioned earlier, there's a big, similarity from device to device, platform to platform. But I don't think it was essential back then. Remember, we're going back, I don't know how many years. We're going back 6 years or so. I don't know. I never bought the iTunes is bloated thing. This was just Windows fanboys complaining. Um, I never understood that people who were using like Windows couldn't figure out how to use iTunes, which is far simpler than doing basic things on Windows. And nothing against Windows, because Windows 11 is, pretty much like Mac OS these days. There's not much of a difference. But back in the day, what would we have been? Windows 98? Windows, what was the one that came after Windows 98?
Was it? Ooh, I don't know. I've never
Windows
been a student of
NT was
Windows.
a sort of a different lineage as well. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think that was just a false problem. I think that was just a lot of people whining because it's an Apple app and they didn't like it. And maybe it wasn't compatible with every single permutation of CPU and graphic card and RAM on Windows PCs, which is always a problem.
Good point. Good point.
But, I think that was, they did it because they had to, and they did it because it made more sense now to consistentify. Well, what's a good word? To homogenize, to make the feature set similar from one device to another. And in retrospect, it's a good thing. I don't like having to sync or back up my iPhone or iPad in the Finder. I don't think that's ideal. And I don't sync anymore, but I do back up my iPhone and iPad to my Mac once a month, just in case the iCloud backup happens, I lose my device, etc. So I always keep backups on my iMac. But I mean, there's no point in complaining about this stuff. It changes. We like it, we don't like it. It's yeah.
Well, and again,
We're too old to complain anymore.
yeah.
Chuck.
Well,
We're
and
too
even
old.
if you're not too old to complain, if you want to get the most out of these apps, you need Kirk's book. Take control.
You definitely need my book.
Yeah, I have Apple Media apps at takecontrolbooks.com. It's the way to learn everything, all the little subtleties. And again, if you have some things that are annoying you, maybe Kirk can help you get them. More importantly, though, I think it'll let you take full advantage of everything these apps can do, because they do go beyond just playing the media. So,
well, it's really, I mean, I'm not trying to undersell the book, but people who really benefit from this book are people who are managing their own media libraries. If all you're doing is listening to Apple Music or watching Apple TV, it's not going to make that much of a difference for you. But once you want to start managing your own files, then that's where the complications come in. And I put complications in italic there because not everyone has complications, but there are lots of variables that come in when you're managing your own library of music, and especially, as you mentioned earlier, of videos.
yeah. Kirk, it's always a pleasure. I'm sorry it took us a little bit longer than normal to get to this book, but I'm glad
No
we got to talk
problem.
about it. You know, it's just one more in a long line of great take control books by you and by a lot of other folks.
And the next edition will be a year older, Chuck.
Yeah. Before I let you go, where can folks find you when you're not writing take control books?
My website is kirkville.com, and you mentioned the Next Track podcast, so thenexttrack.com, and I put links on my website to everything I publish, podcast episodes, articles, etc.
Great. Good to see you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, Chuck.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Again, Take Control books to get Kirk's book as well as all the other Take Control authors you hear about here on Mac Voices. They're all great books. They're all the best way, or one of the two best ways I can think of to learn more about the Apple tech and everything that they cover. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices, or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CacheFly at cachefly.com.